Good afternoon. There we go. So Villanova Law School, welcome indeed. I'm Mark Alexander, and I am the Arthur Kania Dean of the Villanova University Charles Widger School of Law. It's a great title, which I actually love to use because it reflects, frankly, the tradition of this fantastic school. And I'm really pleased to welcome everyone here today for this extraordinary conversation here that is really ultimately the gift, a long-term lasting gift from two of our extraordinary alumni, Connie and David Girard-diCarlo. I just wanted to say really on behalf of the law school, on behalf of the university, I saw our provost, Pat Magidi, here a minute ago. On behalf of the provost, the entire university, welcome to this conversation, and a particular thank you to Connie and David for their extraordinary service to the school and to the fantastic board of directors of the Girard-diCarlo Center who met earlier today, all of whom were seated up here in the front. David Girard-diCarlo will give an introduction of these wonderful speakers and what we're doing today, but I just wanted to reflect for a moment on two individuals who are extraordinary. And they're extraordinary because of what they mean to our school. Connie and David met here many years ago, and as if you get the opportunity to talk to them, you can talk to them about their extraordinary careers. Connie as an attorney growing actually extraordinary work in Aramark, her work in the corporate world. David and his work in the managing partner of Blank Rome, the ambassador to Austria. You can talk about all kinds of extraordinary things about their careers, but if you have 5 minutes with them, ask them about how they met and ask them what that was about. That was here at Villanova Law School when David was a 2L and Connie was a 1L. I let them tell the rest of the story. But the reason I believe that they have sponsored such extraordinary work here at our school is because of what this school has meant to them and what I hope it means to everybody who is here, who is a student, and those of you who are not students, you will learn what a great institution we are. But it is a place where we grow the individual to be more than just a lawyer, but really to develop as human beings, as ethical leaders in the field, and ultimately as friends and colleagues. And certainly it's a lasting relationship that is embodied in Connie and David Girard-diCarlo. So I am really, truly honored to have them now, I think, as my friends, and I think we're all honored to have them leading the Girard-diCarlo Center for Ethics, Integrity, and Compliance. So I turn it over now to David Girard-diCarlo.
Thank you, Steve. Well, thank you, and let me add my welcome to each and every one of you. We're delighted that you're going to be here today, that you are here today, excuse me. I want to acknowledge two of the people that the dean made reference to because they're in the room. Art Kania, who is one of the great benefactors of the law school and graduate of the law school, and Chuck Widger, he and I were law school classmates, and that's why it's the Arthur Kania Deanship and the Chuck Widger Law School at Villanova. I also just want to quickly introduce our advisory board members. Ann Bingaman, unfortunately, could not be here because of some personal challenges she has at home. But we have Tony Welters here, Joe Neubauer, Floyd Clark, Tom Ridge, and obviously my wife and I. And I'm going to introduce the governor, Huntsman, in a minute. The program format is very simple. Brian will pose questions to Governor Huntsman. Governor Huntsman will respond accordingly to those questions. I'm sure it's going to be very provocative and very entertaining, but also hopefully insightful. That is the goal. Brian, before I introduce the governor, as you know, was the former publisher of the Philadelphia Inquirer and Daily News. He has a magnificent background in media and public relations. He has his own company now called Bryan Communications, I think that's right, down to his first name now. And Governor Huntsman is one of, in my view and my wife's view, one of the great Americans. He served 2 terms as the governor of Utah, reelected with an unbelievable mandate in his when he ran for the second time, has served 2 ambassadorships to China and Singapore. He is a patriot. He puts the country first. We need more people like Governor Jon Huntsman, in my judgment. He is currently co-chair with former Senator Joe Lieberman of an organization called No Labels, which is a bipartisan organization that puts country ahead of party and puts our nation's needs in the forefront of everything that is done. So with no further ado, oh, by the way, at the end, excuse me, after we finish, because the classroom is going to have to, we're going to have to vacate the classrooms, and there are professors who have to teach. We actually urge you to go into the Commons, and the board members will be there. Governor Huntsman will be there. Brian will be there, and you can interact with them as you choose. So with those introductory remarks, I turn it over to Brian. You both have microphones?
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. Thank you. Thank you, Governor. Thank you, David and Connie, for your generous support and gift to Villanova that made all this possible. And Governor, for you being here today, I appreciate it.
Brian, delighted.
Yeah, sometimes you pick a topic months out and you're thinking, and then you have this topic, it's really not timely at all. So I don't know about civility in politics, but let's try to make it work, all right? We'll give it a shot. Let me ask you this. At one level, there's this incredible, thing going on now with this national campaign, as well as versions of it on a state and local kind of basis as well, the state U.S. Senate campaigns, congressional campaigns, and the overall tone is as it is. But why should, at one level, should we really care if there's civility in politics? I mean, is this something that maybe you could say, hey, this is part of the American tradition to have an uncivil discussion? And what do you think?
Well, first of all, to David and Connie and to Governor Ridge, my hero in life, thank you for doing what you're doing around ethics and integrity and compliance. I think it's absolutely perfectly packaged for what this country and what this world needs, so thank you for your leadership in that regard. You know, Brian, first of all, it's such a pleasure to be here as just kind of an offbeat Western politician, sitting in this august university in this great law school. I'm inspired by it and by being with all of you. I would say we've always had our disagreements, and we've always had pretty sharp elbows in politics and significant disagreements. But what is fundamentally different today is that after making our best arguments, our most impassioned pleas, we find it absolutely impossible to sit down together at a common table to work out our differences. We don't do that part anymore.
Right.
So what gives? You can't run a business, you can't raise a family, you can't run a university, you can't be dean of the law school unless you're able to sit down with somebody not of your party, not of your faith, not of your belief system to figure out a way forward. That's what's broken. So what we're trying to do is to say, okay, make your best argument. This is what I'm doing with Joe Lieberman. Right. And, we started this national movement that every day we're getting new members of Congress signing on because they're seeing that, by the way, this kind of thing is good politics too. Good politics too. And that is, make your best argument, put down all the data and the analytics that you want in pursuit of whatever you're trying to present. I'll differ, of course, in my presentation. But then let's remember we got to sit down and do the work of the people. And that requires compromise. Every day as governor, as Tom Ridge found, I had people sitting. The most important piece of geography in my state, other than the beautiful national parks, was the desk in my office. Because that's where people came to sit. I didn't know whether they were Republican, Democrat, Independent, Vegetarian, Libertarian, whatever. And I had to work with them. And I had to figure out a way forward to get to the finish line. Yep. Otherwise, I would have been tossed out of office. For whatever reason, we've allowed bad behavior to creep into national politics. So I don't mind that people disagree. We'll all disagree. Every one of us, because that's just life. But what I find completely disconcerting particularly raising 7 kids. You know, we have big families out west sometimes. 2 sons in uniform, serving in the U.S. military, that we fundamentally have reached a point in time where our greatest competitive challenge in this nation is our political dysfunction. It's hurting every aspect of our life. And we don't need to solve every problem, but we do need to get a couple of things right. We need to set budgets. We need to balance the books every now and again. We need to take care of those who fall through whatever safety nets in society we set up to help. And we're not doing the basics.
I was thinking about 1980, you know, a time when and it was Reagan versus Carter, and a time when we have hostages in our embassy. It was being held for over a year. You know, inflation was 14%, unemployment with the so-called misery index. But yet, and it was a strong, you know, campaign and and you had an incumbent president who lost. But it's a different. It just seems different now. Is it campaign finance? Is it and what role do you think that plays, and as well as the media, the fact that we seem to, like, you know, if I have a certain type, I like to watch one network for my news. If I have another kind of a hot button, I like to watch another. We seem to be fractured as a society. That's why I think your no labels approach is such a great one, which is let's fight things out, but at the same time, we're Americans. Like, let's get on with the business of it.
And that's exactly the point. So I have to be careful about this. I can't blame Fox News or MSNBC because I have a daughter who was at MSNBC and now she's at Fox. And she interviewed me last night. I was in Tampa, Florida, doing a town hall meeting for a family member who's running for mayor. And it was so refreshing to get out at the municipal level and to see that things actually work. You know, the biggest issue for this crowd was the parking meters. You know, they might up the price $1, you know, and they were outraged. It carried the whole meeting. It was terrific. So we basically have examples of local governments that work pretty well. But when we get up to the national level, that's where we have the disconnect. And what we want to do at No Labels is to incentivize good behavior. So how do you reward good behavior in politics? Bad behavior traditionally has been rewarded. You can be completely partisan. You can get on your partisan talk shows and raise money from partisan sources, and you seem to get ahead. And 9 out of 10 incumbents get reelected. Well, how do you create a new model in which good behavior, working across the aisle and setting achievable goals for your country, is actually seen as good politics as well? So what is striking to me is that in the primary phase of politics, and Tom and I have been through this at the presidential level, goofiness prevails. Outlandish, outrageous behavior. That's what people want to see. And then the closer you get to November, everybody wants to be seen as a problem solver. You know, I'm a problem solver. I can work with the other. Well, how come we can't bottle that ethos up and begin it earlier in the process? So we have a huge problem in the early phases of our presidential elections. So why do we have what we have today? Look at the delivery system, folks. Look at how it all started, and therein lies the problem and what's going to have to be fixed at some point. I don't think it's beyond repair. Yep. I think we go in very distinct historic and political cycles as a nation, and I think better days are ahead. The bad news for my party, the party of Lincoln, is that we've hit the bottom. The good news for the party of Lincoln is that we've hit the bottom.
Right.
Because there's nowhere else to go. You rebuild, you develop a new strategy, you package new ideas. I remember when the Democratic Party faced the same conundrum in the 80s. Woe is me. Nobody likes us anymore. The youth have fled. We lose in 80, we lose in 84, we lose in 88. And then in 92, somebody pops up with a new unconventional approach, a new take on the issues, and a new ability to build unprecedented coalitions. The time will come again where the Republican Party
So
will
if you had a magic wand, okay, and we can't necessarily just get people's hearts to immediately get warmer and things like this, what are there any things that you look at with No Labels? Is it like maybe, strengthening the party's campaign finance issues? I mean, how do we what steps could we take if we had a magic wand to try to make sure that this cycle in 4 years or in 2 years is not as brutal? I mean,
So if I could wave a magic wand, first of all, the thrust behind No Labels is to be successful as a movement, come to find, you need a couple of things. You need to build an army on Capitol Hill of people who believe in your cause. So what do we have today? And you're going to see them probably live on television for a CNN town hall December 5th or 6th, where we've got almost 100 members of our No Labels Problem Solver Caucus. Never thought we'd be able to put this size of a group together. Half Republicans, half Democrats, from Tea Party to liberals. And you know what they're doing? They're meeting periodically in the same room. And they're beginning to get to know one another. They're building trust. They're meeting each other's families. And they're finding that their disagreements on the issues aren't as deep as they initially thought. The second thing you need is a grassroots infrastructure. You need people in every congressional district of the country who are willing to turn out and get excited about your agenda, which for us is very simple. We want to take finger-pointing, anger, and acrimony and transform it into problem solving. And a lot of folks have said, well, that's crazy. That's never going to happen. You can't change the culture of politics. Of course you can change the culture of politics. It changes all the time. Just reflect on political history and you'll see trends that come and go. Yeah, I think the time is coming where, but the third thing you need, so I lived in 4 countries during my lifetime. Only one country doesn't have a national strategy, this one. You have to have content. You have to have goals that your country is actually moving toward. So we've developed, on a bipartisan basis, a national strategic agenda. So you can ask any member of Congress, where do we want to be in 20 or 30 years? They'll give you a blank stare. I've lived in other countries where they can tell you where they hope to be, and they've actually got programs, policies, and strategies in place to get them there. We don't. Why is that? Now, the market should be able to get you a good part of the way. I mean, I totally believe in that. But beyond that, we should have common goals as Americans, common goals. We're going to disagree as Republicans, Democrats, or independents, but I believe there are things such as transcendent American goals that we can all believe in.
and give me an example of what you think fits into that category.
Well, we polled the American people in developing our platform. And it was interesting. First, it cost a lot of money to poll. I had no idea how costly these things were. Second of all, come to find that whether Republican, Democrat, or independent, and we had like 70 choices for people. And at about an 80-degree interval of acceptance or approval, there were 4 big issues that came through. It was really interesting. Balanced budgets. That's apparently of interest to a whole lot of people. As a governor, I had a balanced budget amendment. I had to balance my budget. It's getting pretty hard at the national level, if not darn near impossible. But at the state level, all but one of the states in America, they have to balance their budgets. And it's a really difficult thing to do. Preparing a budget, turning it into your legislature, and then living with the consequences. You have to do it. The second was energy self-sufficiency. The American people, on a bipartisan basis, want energy self-sufficiency, which is a good thing. Good for the environment, good economic growth potential, et cetera, et cetera. The third is 25 million jobs by 2025, a robust jobs agenda. Now, again, you can drill down and get into a lot more of the detail, but these are the big picture transcendent goals that the American people want. And the fourth is dealing somehow, some way with entitlement spending. I think most people realize that the programs of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, are not red and blue, Republican, Democrat, Fox News, and MSNBC. It's basic mathematics. If you choose to do nothing, you will hit a wall. That's basic math. And I think most Americans get that. So we got a lot of choices. Some of them are fairly politically sensitive and difficult, but that's it. That's what the American people, those are the transcendent goals that, at least in our sampling, American people are interested in.
To make this happen, though, it does take money, doesn't it? You're talking about the polling. I mean, it almost needs a campaign about this. I mean, people need to be seeing these ads and things like this and hearing in the debates. And don't you think? I mean, because it's otherwise. I mean, what seems to be driving so much of it now is money. I mean, and
Yeah,
that's
and let's just talk about that for a minute, because for those of you who have run for president, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who haven't run for president, let's talk before you do. But you come to find, one of the things I walked away from the campaign trail believing is that the way we fund and pay for elections is an abomination. It's a total national embarrassment. And for somebody who doesn't say that, well, they haven't been close enough to the system to fully appreciate it, or they've been totally bought by the system to admit the truth. We need to somehow deal with that reality. The super PACs that we have today, I mean, it's ridiculous. You don't sit before somebody who's giving you a whole bunch of money without an implicit understanding that their issues will be taken up. Come on, you got to be smoking something if you think that it isn't that way. And we have too much of that. So my gripe is not too much money in the system. We have maybe $7 or $8 billion per year in campaign funding. My gripe is that it's too concentrated in a few dozen people. And until such time as we can bring this more to the grassroots and get grassroots folks invested in smaller contributions, I don't mind if the number goes up. I'm really interested in seeing more people participate actively in the process and taking away the influence of just a handful of people. I think it's a ridiculous system. That has to be worked on. And for those of you who are part of the next generation here, you millennials in the crowd, and I know who you are because I'm raising 7 of them. I know kind of what's on your mind and how you see the world. You're going to have to deal with this issue. It's fundamentally standing in the way toward creating a level playing field for our American political system. The second is how we have redistricted this nation into a predictably red and blue outcome.
That is a critical. I mean, for those of you, I first saw it in 1980 when I was at the Republican National Committee, the use of computer modeling to decide where, and that has kind of obviously come up from the old rotary phones to the most.
That's right. That's right.
And so you have these super concentrated districts. So therefore, you get this hard partisanship. So
effectively, we've taken this thing called competition out of politics. It doesn't exist anymore. So what happens if you take competition out of anything? It atrophies. So having really made it so that the general election is much less important than the primary, everything is about winning the primary. Well, when you figure that maybe 10% of the people turn out for a primary, it always goes to the extreme candidate. So, and listen, I've been through the redistricting before. I was governor when we did our decennial census. And the Commerce Department turns over the new numbers for your state's population, and you either get an extra congressional seat or you get something taken away. We had them added, and then you turn the map drawing exercise over to the legislature, which is mistake number 1. Because any outcome in a legislature is going to be skewed toward a partisan outcome. So I put forward the idea of an independent redistricting commission.
that's a really interesting idea.
And it got thrown right in the garbage can.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, only to find that Washington State, Arizona, I think, there are some states that are actually doing this now.
Is that right?
Independent redistricting. So when people say it's hopeless, it ain't hopeless, folks. There are answers to every one of these challenges and problems, and we can flip them around over time to level the playing field. All I'm asking for is level the playing field for people who want to get into politics and don't want to suck up to the big givers and have to play extreme partisanship to get through the primary process.
That's really interesting. I mean, that would be a fundamental reform, and at the same time, obviously a tough one because in a lot of states, the states that don't have that independent commission, they like the way it's being done now. But that does seem like one of those fundamental. You were in high school and you dropped out because you were interested in becoming maybe a professional keyboard player, and then you went back, got your
rock
GE.
band. Yeah,
you were in a rock band.
Thanks for mentioning that
now,
part.
since you ran for president, did you think like at some point, boy, I should have stayed with the musician thing?
Well,
or was
having done since,
fun?
and some with Tom Ridge, having done, 1,000 town hall meetings, standing on the stage, it was always, if I had succeeded as a musician, I wouldn't have to stand here as a politician. I'd be up jamming with my band, and it'd be a much different outcome. But that wasn't to be.
Yeah, 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, right? We'll take some questions from those of you here in the audience. I know, and if you have any questions or comments or would like to add. Yes, Mark Howard from Channel 6, WPVI, a longtime anchor here.
Mark, I used to watch you when I was at school right down the road.
Is that right?
It's great to see you
Where did
again
you go
in
to
person.
school?
Penn.
Oh,
Yeah.
He got his GED, seriously, for high school, and then applied to college.
Well, I went to.
That's right, University of Utah first.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, transfer.
The only thing I noticed from this year's presidential campaign, you touched on the primary system. It seems to me that the Democrats have superdelegates, which sort of keeps a lid on outrageous candidates from winning a lot of primaries and becoming a candidate. George McGovern, I think, inspired that because he lost the worst of anybody. It seems to me that if you had superdelegates in the Republican Party who were elected officials, and they went into a smoke-filled room and decided that maybe Jeb Bush is a good candidate for president this year, that would give him a start that would be hard to beat. The problem this year seems to be that it was too democratic, too much democracy.
That's right. Well, you're talking about a construct. So I was a superdelegate when I was governor. And you do have elected officials who become superdelegates in the RNC process. The problem is it really runs afoul of the grassroots desires of many of the activists in the convention process. So every state has a party convention that elects the slate that ultimately become the delegates to the national convention. If you get too many superdelegates, you have a total rebellion on your hands from the activists. So I think that balance has to be looked at very carefully so as not to have a rebellion actually on the convention floor. The balance today, you know, I'm more of a grassroots person. I'd like to see more of them go to the people who are out there working hard in the trenches as opposed to the elected officials. But I get the oversight aspect of having elected responsible people, a little bit like the argument for the Electoral College. But here listen, conventions are, and parties, you know, increasingly they're private organizations. But I've watched the Republican Party, and I think the Democratic Party as well, diminish in terms of stature and really the ability to move the market and to move events. They turn out the vote, they organize a convention every 4 years, but the real work is being done among the private organizations that are raising money, which is a fairly unprecedented thing. Super PACs are being organized, and you've got big money flowing into, you know, third-party organizations that have no connection whatsoever with parties. It's almost as if parties increasingly are being rendered irrelevant. And then when you look at the demographics of the parties, you might have 23% of registered voters who are Republican, 25 or 26 who are Democrat, and now 42% who are none of the above. The fastest growing party in the red state of Utah is none of the above. It's the unaffiliated voters. So just the sheer demographics of party registration is going to have a pretty profound effect on where politics will take us in the years ahead, which could be pretty interesting and pretty disruptive.
Yes.
Do you think you would have to change Citizens United in order to address the fundraising problem you're pointing to?
Yes. And I would hope that there would be enough outraged people across the United States that if you had a presidential candidate who undertook a tour of this great country of ours in a Grateful Dead type of format, where you get thousands of people following, that you might have some effect. Because I know what people are thinking in the grassroots of this country. You know, I live in a place called Flyover Country, you know, in Utah. And people are pretty outraged about what's happened. And for those who don't understand it, just explain it for 2 minutes. And they get there too. I think it was a disservice to the American people longer term, and I have the feeling it will change if the right kind of emotion is connected with the right deliverer of the message. It's a matter of time.
Don't you think money is speech, though?
Well, based on Buckley versus Vallejo, 1972, that was a result. But I think we have to look so self-funding, I'm not sure is going to be a long-term feature that we can live with. I think for somebody to put in an unlimited amount of money to self-fund their campaign, I think runs counter to the principles of grassroots democracy. I really do. In a day and age when we have economic extremes, you've got people with all kinds of money, so much they don't know what to do with it all. To be able to fund $1 billion campaign from one person against the grassroots, I don't think is the American spirit that we've all grown up with. I'm not sure that's a principle or an aspect of democracy that we would be proud of.
When you're traveling around, you know, ambassador to China, Singapore, you travel the world, what are they, when you go, my friends overseas are like, the first question is always, what the heck is going on in your country? Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the Chinese are usually confused about our electoral process. And this year, you can't even begin the conversation because they're so perplexed by it all. And their response is usually, I think we'll keep our one-party system. And my response is usually, well, look at what it does to the average individual in China and their inability to petition their government and to speak out freely and to write freely. They have no such capability. What I'm a little ashamed of, as a practicing diplomat who's been in front of pretty hostile audiences and in countries that aren't always friendly to the United States, where you have to stand up for American principles and American values. When we're not practicing those values and principles well at home, we lose all credibility on the soapbox. And when we are good as a country, our light shines like nothing else, and people aspire. We're an aspirational nation. People want to be like us when we're at our best. And when we're not, they look elsewhere. So make no mistake about it, you know, the Chinese, particularly under Xi Jinping, who's the new leader, he's been in for about 3 years, 63 years old. He'll be re-elected, re-upped for another term next year at the 19th Party Congress. He'll serve another 5 years till 2022. He's interested in creating a new dynamic, in breaking up the traditional Western order that has prevailed since the end of World War II. He wants to build new institutions. He wants new countries that are just now developing and going through governance crises of their own to look to their model instead of ours. It's a competitive world out there. You might not be thinking in these terms, but many are looking at other models as opposed to ours, which has always been the ultimate aspiration in terms of the role of the individual in society, that Jeffersonian sense of the individual. And they're saying, you're not doing it so well.
Right. And that is an interesting, yes, sir, go ahead.
Sorry, this is a question?
Yeah.
So my question was, just to paraphrase Mahatma Gandhi, he says, we get the governments we deserve. And I wonder whether we shouldn't lay a lot of the blame actually with ourselves, for the electorate, for two reasons. One, we're too lazy to show up to vote, so we don't participate in our primaries. You described the center-fleeing primaries, the center-seeking generals. People just don't show up.
Right.
And so there's laziness. And then two, our ignorance. I mean, I bet if we had everyone in this room stand and you said those who can identify both of their United States senators and any one piece of legislation they have voted on during their tenure and how they voted, that we'd have fewer than 5% of the group still standing.
You're talking about just the basics to maintain any strong and healthy democracy. I totally agree with this. And so when you have 93 million voters who don't show up, that's where we are today in America. 93 million of our fellow country men and women who are eligible to vote don't. And so we did this interesting thing when I was reelected as governor in Utah. I noticed that the young people fell off in terms of their overall turnout percentages, and it really kind of bothered me because this is our future, by the way, and if you're not getting invested in the system, we're all going to atrophy over time. And we created a commission on strengthening our democracy, which I thought was kind of novel. And I brought together people of all political persuasions, and I said, in 2 months, I want from you some recommendations in terms of what we can do as free people, not the state government, but all of us, civil society, local government, state government, in shoring up trust. And one of the things that came out, I mean, it was all of it, people were losing trust in government because of the way we funded the revolving door with lobbyists. But some of what came out was, are we teaching civics in ways that allow young people to understand their responsibility and their obligation as a citizen of this country? Exactly what you're talking about. And I'm a believer in that 100%. And that comes in all forms.
Yes, sir.
Governor, are there any plans or thoughts on how to shorten our electoral
Wouldn't that be great?
The question was, are there ways that we can shorten the entire election period so that it's not so stretched out?
Let me tell you
and
one of the
costly?
problems here. There's the fourth estate called the media, and come to find that politics is a huge moneymaker for them.
Not newspapers, unfortunately. Yeah, but TV.
We
yeah.
found that out West too.
I kept trying to encourage that.
You know, and so 4 years ago when we did like 104 debates, and I remember attending a good many of them. They weren't sanctioned debates, but when CNN would say, we're going to organize a debate, next month, show up if you want, well, you got to show up when they organize one, or you'll be a no-show, and that's held against you. Come to find that, the average viewing audience on CNN at night is maybe, 700,000, 800,000, maybe 1 million. Well, they get 10 million viewers for one of these deals. So what does that do in terms of advertising revenue? It's a big deal. So our problem is this. As soon as the election ends in November, because politics is such big business now for the media, it didn't used to be, they're going to start some format, some road show, some talk show, some whatever, that will keep us all glued to our television sets to see the next train wreck in politics, because it's good business for them. And my concern is that we have now a never-ending campaign cycle. And when you have a never-ending campaign cycle, you never get around to the issues that really matter for the American people, complete with responsible, thoughtful policy responses and solutions for these issues, because they're not sexy, and there's no blood left behind, and there's nothing that will improve or move content. That's a big problem. So why did people not show up at some of my events when I ran for president? Because I don't do theater very well. I don't do political theater. I'm not a good politician to begin with. I don't much enjoy doing that stuff. But I am a big believer in getting people together and formulating ideas that can actually better serve a population on a bipartisan basis. But that just isn't interesting for people to cover. So Huntsman, let him talk about his stuff over there. We're going after the other candidates who are calling each other names. And that's a big problem. And politics is entertainment. It's a big problem.
And just to get a sense on those numbers, because I think this will be helpful for you. So the average audience for CNN across the entire United States, about 600,000 or 700,000. MSNBC a little bit less, Fox sometimes a little bit more, across the whole country.
Now, when Tom Ridge appears as a guest, it goes up substantially.
It skyrockets. Actually, but no, that we know that. But anyway, but the part that's interesting is, just so you get a sense of audience, this Sunday, the same Nielsen measurement, the Philadelphia Inquirer, I know that just from being there and being on the board now, will sell about 450,000 newspapers, and over 1.1 million people will physically pick up this paper in this marketplace. So when you can think about Fox or CNN going from 700,000 to 10 million, you can imagine how much more valuable. So keeping the fight going as you're condemning it, but keeping it going really rings the cash register.
Yep.
That's an important thing to remember too. Yes.
So right now, you virtually see Trump setting the stage for Wednesday morning, calling this election rigged should he lose. What do you think that kind of delegitimizing talk does to the perceived legitimacy of our electoral system?
And I've been asked to repeat some of these questions, or why don't you repeat them, Governor, so that they can pick it at the rest of the
the question was about Trump teeing up the whole idea of the election being rigged in anticipation of the debate on Wednesday. Let me just say this. Fear is a driver in politics. You can use fear or you can use hope. Those are the fundamentally the two options you have in communicating as a politician. When fear is used in an irresponsible fashion and you whip people up into a frenzy, I think it's totally un-American. And what we have seen in recent elections is people using the rhetorical tool of fear to turn out votes, to get people to show up at their events, and to drive content on television. And I think this notion of a rigged election is totally based on the fear factor. Now, I came up when, it's hard to imagine that not long ago, people didn't talk about the fear factor. They talked about hope and about optimism and morning in America, right, and what we can do to make it even better. And all of a sudden, we found ourselves here in the gutter. And I think it's an example of last ditch desperation efforts, because if you're winning, you don't talk like that. Take it from somebody who's been on both sides in a campaign. When you're winning, you don't talk like that. So you delegitimize the opposition, you delegitimize the process. Well, thank goodness there aren't a whole lot of people watching cable news. So the more you watch cable news, the more you get infested with this kind of thinking, and the angrier you become. And I just think it goes in circles, and our anger feeds on different emotions, and pretty soon we're organized as a people around things that we disagree on a lot more than we're organized around things that we agree on as Americans. And it's the first time in my life that I can remember that we're now more organized on disagreements than agreements. But I think this feeds to it. And I think politicians, people running for office, they have an obligation to be responsible on the stump, to use data and facts that are verifiable, and to not whip people into a frenzy that would create a fear factor, which is exactly what we have found. We'll see. But listen, for those of us who have been involved at the grassroots level of politics, we may have had some rigged elections in cities in 1960, but I think we actually do a pretty good job. And people who run the mechanics of voter turnout and the ballot box at the grassroots levels do a pretty darn good job.
And it's interesting when you talk about those numbers of 400, 500,000, you could make the case that this Wednesday conversation is about, and there's been some speculation, starting another TV news network that perhaps somebody like Trump or some of the folks around him would be interested in doing. Because again, out of 300 and some million Americans, if you get 400,000 of them tuning in, you've got a real business too. Yes?
In looking at the title of today's talk, Ethics, Integrity, and Civility, can you share your thoughts for parents and teachers who are concerned with letting our children watch something as basic and fundamental to the process as the presidential debate, as a father yourself?
The question, well, why don't you paraphrase the question? Yeah, the question, the questioner talked about the overall, ethics and integrity in election. So how do you handle just having the kids watch these things as fundamental as the presidential debates? I mean, when you have this complete lack of civility and you've got, sexual talk and all those sorts of things going on.
So when I had to turn the radio off with my 10-year-old daughter recently, that about put me over the top. And it's happened more than once this election. I've never had that happen before. So I'm raising a daughter from China, and I'm raising a daughter from India. Both of them abandoned at birth. And so traditionally, I've compared and contrasted our political system here with theirs. And that's been helpful because they both come from very different political systems. One a one-party communist system, and the other more of a parliamentary democracy that was bequeathed them by the British. And so that's been fun to compare and contrast. But I can see in their eyes, even at their young ages, when they hear the debates and they watch the outrage and they hear the language from the stump, that it isn't who we are. It isn't who we are. And what it requires of us as parents is to walk them through better moments and better chapters in history. So I sit them down sometimes and I'll read a book from recent American history that will reflect on our better angels and chapters where we've actually done the right thing. I think you have to achieve a balance for young people in situations like this and use it as a learning experience. I think that's the only way you can do it. And I'm dealing with it as a dad in real time. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yes, in the back there.
I have a question pertaining to third-party candidates. Do you think that America needs to start to shift away from strictly a two-party system? Do you think that's a lot where that corruption can come from? Do you think people like Gary Johnson, Jill Stein are important to kind of flesh out some of the issues we have with just a purely Democratic or Republican Congress?
So the thought was about the two-party system. Is that part of the problem? And would we be stronger if there was stronger third and fourth kind of parties?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. If you look at the demographics of politics, you can't deny 42% of the voting population. Now, they probably skew right or left to some degree, but a choice for none of the above. The problems today are very real for a third-party candidate, and that is in getting ballot access in all the 50 states. you've got to get, a certain percentage of the population in the form of signatures, which means you've got to stand in parking lots with an army of volunteers for probably a year to meet the requirement. So it's terribly expensive to meet the ballot access requirements in the states. Second of all, the Electoral College. So where are the electors voted on for both? There is no process for independents to have a convention in which they vote state by state for their electors. So having been through this at the grassroots level, at a Republican convention, we would elect 7 electors that go in January to the state capitol and cast their ballot. And we have a number that is equal to the number of seats in Congress. The Democrats do the same thing. There is no such process for an independent. So you can do all the right work and you can actually win the election technically, but the Electoral College process is somehow not going to go your way because there's just no way to deliver electors for your party. So there's real work to be done ahead, but I do think this is going to be a disruptive feature of American politics going forward. So if you had a legitimate pathway with hurdles that weren't so high in terms of ballot access and the Electoral College, can you imagine what the election would be like today? I think our third-party candidates, and I know the one on the Libertarian ticket because we campaigned together 4 years ago. They're facing these hurdles. They're probably only registered in half the states for ballot access. So it's a big. The Libertarian Party has a better infrastructure in place than others, but it's really tough. I think we'll see that disrupted in the years ahead, and I think it could be quite interesting. But that goes against the whole historic premise that we're a two-party country. We've always, the Whigs in 1856, give way to the Republicans. John Fremont runs as a first president, loses, but Abraham Lincoln wins in 1860. But it's still a two-party system. Stars die in physics, and parties die too. When they quit delivering something that the people are interested in and something that inspires and motivates, they go out of business. And then something comes up in their place.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you for being here, Governor Huntsman. You're someone whose opinion I've always thought was very thoughtful and reflective, and I'd be interested in your understanding and your comments or reflections on reform of the criminal justice system in the United States today, especially given your travels to so many other countries as ambassador, and what reflections your institution might have on how we might go about that.
The question was tied to reforms on the criminal justice system and your observations from traveling in other parts of the world.
Well, each country does it a little differently based upon history, based upon colonial legacies. In the case of Singapore, where I lived, for example, or Taiwan, where I've lived, or China, where they have two very different kinds of judicial tracks. One, a traditional judicial track, although without much rule of law, and the other a party judicial track. I would love for you to take a look at what we did in Utah. So I don't want to get into too much of the detail around our sentencing commission. We were just talking with the dean and some of the others about what we did in the face of mandatory minimums that seem to prevail, and taking a different and more flexible approach to looking individually at the crime and the reasons for the crime. The mandatory minimums, I think, were clogging our prisons. And it was interesting because I go out to our prisons, and usually 80% of our incarcerated population were there for one reason: drugs. And on the female side, one type of drug, methamphetamine. Now, in certain parts of the country, like New Hampshire, it's heroin, but in our part of the country, it was methamphetamine. And I say, how can we lock away these good people? And I went to talk to a good many of them, mothers, accomplished people. They fell into the trap of addiction. My sister died of addiction, and I saw it up close and very personal. There's got to be a better way to get them back on their feet through therapy and rehabilitation facilities that are not just a one-size-fits-all, throw the book at them. And we worked really hard on that in Utah. And if you want to go look at what we did, you can read all about it. But that's kind of where I come down. Not everybody liked it. I got talk shows calling, asking for me to go on, and so they could browbeat me. But take a look at it. I think it's a glimpse of where I think we'll be in the future.
We need to be out of here by 1 o'clock on because other students, but I'd love to take another question or so from, yes, sir.
Many people think that the current election is a disaster. What has to happen in 4 years or 8 years from now in order to reestablish a civilized country and a civilized election? What would you like to see happen?
So the question was, if we assume, and there seems to be a general assumption by most people, that this election year is kind of a disaster, what do we need to do between now and 4 and 8 years from now?
You know what I think would be great? We talk about this program here, ethics and integrity. How cool would it be to have some candidates stand up after the debacle of this election, particularly on my side, because I think we're going to lose, and we're going to have to rebuild. The onus is on the Republican Party to rebuild, which I think represents an optimistic moment, an optimistic moment, to stand up and admit where we have gone wrong and to speak to the realities of a broken primary process. And then go about an undertaking with the American people, totally transparent and honest, that begins to address some of these issues. Because it doesn't take somebody who's been through it like me. I think most Americans can see that campaign finance is broken, gerrymandering needs to be addressed. The early primary states, it's a racket. Right. It's simply a racket, the way we do this. And to have an honest conversation with the American people. And maybe it would take people who aren't running for office to do that. I would love to see a cleansing, open, transparent discussion about what we're doing wrong. To say we've hit the bottom, we can't get any lower, and we're going to bounce high this time. We're going to recover, because that's what we do. And that's what Alexis de Tocqueville talked about what we do when he came here with his buddy Beaumont and wrote that great book, Democracy in America, when there was something happening in the New World. He said of America, America's a great country not because its people are superior. America's a great country because it can heal its wounds. Now think about that for a minute. We've always had the ability, generation after generation, to take what seemed to be insurmountable problems, world wars, depressions, political problems, assassinations, trust deficits, and turn them around based on healing our wounds. And it would be a great thing to have that kind of conversation.
And one of the challenges for all of us in this room, or the opportunities maybe is in de Tocqueville in that same book, talks about how when there's a problem to be solved in America, people volunteer and step up. And that's what was so unique compared to other countries around the world. I mean, sometimes I get worried that people are losing confidence in our system because freedom of speech, freedom of press, the right to vote, all men are born equal. This is a better system. It creates more economic opportunity. It creates so many other things for people. The Chinese system, however you want to package it, but a kind of a dictatorship, that doesn't really work over the long haul. And we need, as Americans, to remember. So what do you need going out of here as young people, as well as some of us are older? Get involved. Don't sit on the sidelines.
That's it. I'll just end on this note of optimism, because I'm an eternal optimist. You don't get into politics unless you're A, somewhat crazy, and B, an eternal optimist. But I wish you could see this country from 10,000 miles away over in China, because we still, somebody said in one of the debates, this may be the last election. What are you smoking? This might be the last election? Okay, and then one of the advisors got on the talk show circuit. This is going to be the last election. If you could see this country from 10,000 miles away, in a communist dictatorship, we shine. We innovate, we're compassionate, we love each other for the most part, we integrate well, notwithstanding our challenges from time to time. We have institutions of democracy that are fundamentally sound. We have a constitution. We're set. We have rule of law. What we have had, ladies and gentlemen, is human failure. Fundamentally. We have failed to do just the minimum, to get along with one another, to respect one another, and to work toward common goals, notwithstanding our differences. Since it is human failure, there's only one fix. Only we can fix it. It's It's got to take a human fix, a human solution. You can't create a new institution or a new document that's going to. We got all that.
No, you're right.
It's a human fix. That's why I'm optimistic that we're smart enough as a people, and we've been through cycles before, where we can repair our wounds, and we can get off to a better tomorrow.
The state of Delaware, after the election, about a couple weeks later, has this wonderful tradition that everybody who's run for office, Republicans or Democrats, gets together to bury the hatchet. When you think about it, and what a wonderful thing that would be if every state in the country did that as well. That sense of, we fought these last couple of months, it's been hard, it's been tough, things have been said, but now we're Americans together. So, well, Governor, I just want to say on behalf of everyone here, and Connie and David, and this distinguished board of advisors that you've put together, thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Really enjoyed it.